only other person that might be. I think the only other person that might be coming is Claudius, but I do not see him yet. So,
want to give him a minute?
Decimus Claudius?
yeah.
Well, he is also doing that interview today, so I don't know if he...
I think it was supposed to be over by now,
Okay.
but perhaps not.
Well, that may have been the source. He may have been caught up in transitioning somehow. Don't know.
Yeah. I would say give him 1 minute and then we'll get started. No problem.
Sounds good.
There is a website in the Netherlands, which is like The Onion, and it has an article about researchers finding a century-old way of anti-conception, socks and sandals. And of course, they're talking about the Romans wearing socks and sandals, and that this still works, and it's very natural and durable, no hormones. Genius.
That's very funny. I'm also fascinated that it's kind of a it is something that kind of transcends cultural boundaries a little bit. So. All right, I suppose we should get started.
Alrighty. So hopefully I'm sharing my screen. Can you all see a map of Europe?
Yes.
Alrighty. And I'm doing it right. Why this is over here, I don't know. That's where we want it. Okay. So thank you all for coming. This is my attempt to kind of visually explain some of the migrations of some of the major Germanic tribes. I find I do much better when I can visualize things, when if I can see, the way that one thing can impact another. I do much better if I can see it on a map and visualize it that way. So I've put together this sort of presentation to do exactly that. So you can kind of see some of the interactions between some of the tribes and how they might impact each other. What you're looking at here are the 10 tribes that I'm going to be tracking. The Goths, Aruli, Utes, Angles, Saxons, Franks, Lombards, Vandals, Burgundians, and Huns. We're starting in the year 200 of the Common Era. I'm color coding the names of the tribes, white being pagan, gold being Arian Christian, and then green being Catholic Christian. And as they all convert, we'll get to see all that kind of interaction as well. So we start in the 200s, and the first thing that we note is that the Goths moved from southern Sweden into Poland, and then from Poland they move into what is now known as Moldova over here. We are now around here. One of the most famous migrations happens around 350, where the Huns, which are not a Germanic tribe, but play a very large role in Germanic history. In fact, a lot of the heroic poems of the Poetic Edda involve figures of the Huns.
Ganz in Ordnung.
Germanized.
Und bei dir?
Also ich habe gemerkt, Frau mag den Schnee.
Oh.
Salve, and thank you for muting. So, for example, Attila the Hun is known as King Atli in the Poetic Edda, in some of the heroic poems. So even though they're not a Germanic tribe, they cast a long shadow into the Germanic tribes. And they start to move from Ukraine into what we now know as Hungary around 350. And at the same time, the Vandals start to move from the middle of Germany. I'm sorry, the Huns don't go quite that far. They go to Bulgaria. The Vandals move from Germany down there as well. So we see this kind of, for whatever reason, the Balkans seem to be attracting a lot of the tribes at this point. And at this point, we see the Goths actually split into two. We have the Ostrogoths and the Visigoths, meaning the East and the West Goths.
Vedius, if people have questions, do you want us to wait, or would you like
Nope,
people to?
at the time is the perfect time to do it.
Okay.
And those who are north of the Danube, the one of the major rivers, obviously, of Europe, are conquered by the Huns during this time. So we see this kind of fracturing of the Visigoths. We have the ones that are under Hunnish rule, we have the Ostrogoths, and then we have the Visigoths. Slightly after this, we have more movement out of the north here. We see the Angles and the Saxons, who will famously later on become the Anglo-Saxons. I'm going to keep doing that, aren't I? Start to move over into Britannia. And at this time, we see a lot of conversion activity. We are now in the late 300s, and the Burgundians, who are over here in Eastern Europe, they become Arian Christians, as do the Goths. And a lot of this was due to the translation of the Bible into the Gothic language. And that's actually one of the chief examples of the Gothic language that we still have is those translations of the Bible. So it's very indicative of the power of having the Bible in one's vernacular, in the local language. It's a very powerful conversion tool, because a lot of these tribes, they don't speak Latin as a matter of course. They speak their own language. So by that conversion method, the Arian Christians were very successful. And the differences between Arian Christianity and Catholic Christianity there's a lot of theological differences and everything, but they were also political differences. They were vying for power within and without the empire, and looking for influence. And the more people they had under their particular vision of Christianity, the more power their bishops had, and so forth. Arian Christianity, in a nutshell, it's sort of a more Gnostic vision of Christianity. I'm not a Christian theologian, so I'm not going to be able to go into a lot of the details of it. But it was a close thing, and either one could have ended up winning over the course of history. It turns out, obviously, the Catholic side did, but you still see outbreaks, so to speak, of these of Arian Christianity popping up throughout the Middle Ages. The idea of these Gnostic notions of Christianity, where good and evil are more evenly matched, is a powerful theme that keeps coming up. But in terms of the Germanic tribes, it crested, and then the Catholics just basically took over by converting the kings, and where the kings go, the rest follow usually. So we are now the Huns at this point, being in Dacia and Pannonia and so forth, they're beginning to be brought into the Roman legions as auxiliaries. So this is where we see, and historically, Germanic tribes had been used as auxiliary troops for centuries at this point. This is the first time we see the Huns And obviously the reason the Huns were so valuable as auxiliary troops is because of their mastery as horsemen. The Romans were always indifferent in terms of cavalry. And they were infantry soldiers. They had cavalry, but it wasn't their specialty. It is the specialty of the Huns. So having the Huns available as those auxiliary troops really did help the Romans during this period. And now we see the Burgundian. We are now in the 380s. The Burgundians, having been converted, they move from Poland into France, and this you can tell because there's to this day the province of Burgundy is named after them, and that's where the famous Burgundy wine comes from. And they made a very big stamp on French history just by enduring so long. From this point, we are now almost at the year 400. The Huns keep moving south. They are now into Greece. And now, once we hit the year 400, we have some more activity in the north. The Utes from Jutland today, they also move over into Britannia. The Visigoths, the Western Goths, move into Italy. This is where we start to see the empire in the west is crumbling. The barbarians the Germanic tribes are pouring over the boundaries, the borders, and the Visigoths. This is where we see King Alaric the Goth has invaded Italy at this point. Now we also have here the Lombards. The Lombards are also known as the Langobards, and the name means the long beards. There's a Germanic legend that says that they were given that name by Odin, who was tricked by his wife Frigga into giving them the name and thus giving them victory in a war with their neighbors. The story goes that Odin promised to give victory to the first side that he saw. And so Frigga told the Lombards to have their women take their hair and put it over their faces. And then she moved his bed so that it faced them. And so when he woke up in the morning, he said, "Who are those Longbeards?" And by giving them the name, he gave them the victory in the battle, which is a neat thing, I think. And at this point, they move from their point in northern Germany into what is now Czechoslovakia. And the Eruli, who were in southern Sweden, by this time have moved into Gaul, crossing the Rhine. The Eruli are named in Tacitus in Germania, and they are noted as for their mastery of runes, runic magic, and so forth. You will often see in runic inscriptions a reference to Erulians and as rune masters, and that's where the name comes from, is from this particular tribe. Whether historically they really were more runically inclined than other Germanic tribes, it's kind of dubious. I know in modern day, some groups use the word Erulian as kind of a title in magical orders and so forth. But the name ultimately derives from the Heruli, this tribe here that's crossed into Gaul. And also we see the Vandals around the same time, slightly after 400, the Vandals moving from eastern Bulgaria and Hungary into Germania. So the Vandals are very active at this point. We see them now go from only a few years later, the Vandals are going into Spain. And Portugal. They basically conquer Hispania. And of course, Vandal is where we get our modern term Vandal for vandalism, because of the great destruction that they wrought when they were conquering the Roman the Roman territories. And at this point, the Vandals are still pagan, and the Lombards, on the other hand, have been converted to Arian Christianity. Any questions so far? I know I'm just kind of going fast, but I want to, you know, as I said before, I want to kind of show these interactions and show the relative positions of where things are moving. Questions at this point?
If I think about the Vandals, they covered huge distances.
Yes. They
How
covered-
many years can we think that it took them to go toward Germania, or to go towards Spain?
The Vandals made it from Hungary to Spain in about 60 years total. So in the long span of time, that's actually a very quick migration. And there were actually spurts where they would just go, you know, it would take them a year or two to cover, you know, a great deal of distance. For example, they'd never really settled in Gaul. They kind of went straight on into Hispania. And then later on, they're going to go into North Africa. So they kind of go in fits and spurts, but from where they started to get to Hispania was about 60 years.
Who was it that was occupying Germania throughout this presentation? Because towards the beginning, all of the Germanic tribes were sort of clustered in the northern end towards Denmark and southern Sweden, I guess, there. But there's an empty space between the tribes and the Roman Empire. Who were those people living there? I mean, I assume it was inhabitants.
Bear in mind, I'm only showing 10 or 11 of the major tribes. There are literally hundreds of smaller Germanic tribes. And of course, when we say that, you know, the Burgundians moved from one place to another, it's, you know, they did leave some of their people behind. So it's not like the regions that they move out of are evacuated of people completely. There are still other smaller tribes that fill in the gaps. And of course, you know, not everybody goes on this big trek with them. So it's a bit more nebulous than it looks like on the map. But it's a very good point, is that they're not depopulating these areas. Other smaller groups then tend to move into the vacuum that they leave behind.
Yeah, and I think in certain circumstances, though, there was like significant depopulation of areas, right? So like on the Danish peninsula, I think the large majority was essentially empty. And I think I'm forgetting his name. There's mention of the fact that it was essentially barren after these groups left for quite a while.
Probably, I think that would be, in terms of Denmark, it might be the case, but I know in central Germany, there were definitely, you know, they were definitely not depopulated in that sense. I had not heard that about Denmark, though. That's interesting. Yeah,
and so the other thing that I wanted to mention was that we also had Slavic migration going on at the same time. So they were often backfilling, you know, right, the spaces that were being left over.
Especially when we see like the Goths and the Huns moving out of these positions in the Balkans. You're right. That's when the Slavic peoples from Sarmatia are coming in and as you say, backfilling in. That's a great point. Does that all make sense? Does that answer the question?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, thank you.
Okie doke. So now we're at 410, and this is when Alaric famously sacks Rome. And almost immediately after that, the Burgundians found the kingdom of Burgundy. And this is what I mean when I say they leave a big mark on the history of France. There's a kingdom of Burgundy, or some sort of Burgundian political occupying state there for hundreds and hundreds of years. So it really leaves an impression on them. And at this point, almost immediately after sacking Rome, the Visigoths move into Gaul, and then only 6 years later they move into Hispania. And this is where it starts to look like a billiard table, because as soon as the Visigoths move into Hispania, they chase out the Vandals, who go into North Africa, and that happens around 410, 415, something like that. Then we have them conquering Carthage, the famous city that the Romans destroyed and then rebuilt because it was just too useful to have a port there, not to have it there. They conquer Carthage in 429. And then we also have around that same point, the Huns start their big move. They're moving northwest into the heart of what was the Roman Empire. And only a few years later, in 437, so the inevitable ticker of time goes down a little bit more, the Huns actually conquer the Burgundians. And this is where we start to see the Huns having this big influence over the Germanic tribes, because they have the power because of the power of their wonderful cavalry soldiers, that they can overwhelm just about anybody else. So everybody else kind of clears out of the way. You see, we saw as the Huns moved up, the Visigoths moved out, and they bumped the Vandals, and then the Huns took on the Burgundians. There's all this kind of interaction among them. And then the Burgundians themselves, because they are under attack by the Huns, and the kingdom of Burgundy is overthrown, they move to the southern end of France to get out of the way of the Huns, and this happens in 443. Now, at this point, we see the Saxons have pretty much completed. We're at 450 of the Common Era. The Saxons have completed their migration in a big push at the end there. The Huns are defeated by the Franks in the Battle of Chalons in 451. So the power of the Huns is broken forever. The Huns basically disappear at this point. Any remaining soldiers go back into the east and are really not heard from again in any major capacity. So the Huns go away at this point. The Vandals have been converted straight to Catholicism. The Franks also don't go through the Arian Christian phase as some of the others do. And as we go forward, the Ostrogoths, just a few years later in 454, the Ostrogoths, the Eastern Goths, they start to move west into what we now call Austria. The Vandals, around that same time, the Vandals start to move against Rome and conquer Sicily, and then they move on to Rome in 455. In 476, however, now we jump ahead a little bit. And bear in mind, even though we're kind of jumping ahead 25 years, they're still moving around in little ways, but we for the sake of simplicity, we have to only mark a few of the major things. But the Eruli go down and they sack Rome in 476. This is the date that usually marks the end of the Western Roman Empire, when Odoacer, the king of the Eruli, sacks Rome. And then we have the Franks in 486, found the Kingdom of France, the first Merovingian kingdom. And that's a very famous. That was the first of the French kingdoms that ultimately end with Charlemagne. Now we have more stuff going on. We are nearing the end of the 500s. The Ostrogoths now make their move on Italy and start what's called the Ostrogothic Kingdom of Italy. And this shows you how big a shadow Rome itself cast over history at this point. The effective control has been lost to Rome for a couple of centuries now. They lost Britannia, they lost Gaul, they lost Hispania, they lost North Africa. But Rome is still considered in a psychological sense as the top of the heap. When you have Rome, that is the marker that you have power. And that's why all of these tribes keep getting called to go to Rome, is because they want to say that we conquered Rome. We conquered the city that conquered the world. And you see that keep happening over and over and over. In fact, you even see it as far late as Napoleon, if you want to take it that far. At this point, the Burgundians, who had their kingdom, they have converted from Arianism to Catholicism. And about 25 years after that, in 526, the Ostrogothic kingdom of Italy falls. And by the end of the 500s, the Ostrogoths are pretty much absorbed into the other tribes in the area. So the Ostrogoths are gone at this point, as are the Heruli, for the same reason. They sack Rome, and then they just kind of get absorbed into the other tribes, and we never really hear from them again. And the same fate befalls the Vandals. Now we have this kind of more generalized, generic Italian Germanic mixture that admixes into the existing Mediterranean Roman people, this is very much where you get the modern Italian people of today, is this mix of ancient Romans and a number of different Italian Germanic tribes, specifically because Italy, and Rome in particular, was so important in the ancient mind, in the medieval mind. That's why you have this great admixture of different peoples around there. At this point, the Lombards are still around. They are now Catholic, and they move into what we now call Czechoslovakia. The Burgundians are now conquered by the Franks and absorbed into their ranks. So the Burgundians go away, and now we have this Frankish Empire here. The Lombards, as we get further into the 500s, the Lombards move into northern Italy and establish a kingdom there. That is where we get the modern Lombardy from, because the Lombards established their kingdom there. And around this same time, we have the mass conversion of the Germanic tribes in England. Augustine is the first Archbishop of Canterbury, and kicks things off with a mass baptism of 10,000 people. So in that respect, we have the Jutes, the Angles, and the Saxons all merging into what we now call the Anglo-Saxons. Now, when we say that they convert, obviously it doesn't happen with the flip of the switch. The conversion process takes decades, if not centuries. Even centuries after this point, we still see pagan kings in some of the different Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, like Penda of Mercia is the last Anglo-Saxon pagan king, and he's there hundreds of years after this point. So, don't think that just because we say that, oh, they are now Christian, the entire population has converted. It's more of a process than anything else. And yeah, in fact, the last heathen Anglo-Saxon king is Arwald, king of the Isle of Wight, and he dies in 686, so almost 200 years after this point. The Visigoths at this point are also Catholic, so the last vestiges of Arianism, by the time we hit to 600, are gone. We now see, we don't have specific tribes at this point, but we see conversion efforts in Denmark in 718. We see in 723 the Franks, Saint Boniface chops down Thor's oak famously in Western Germany. In 750, what was the Merovingian Empire now becomes the Carolingian Empire. There's still the Franks, but it's basically the transition from one dynasty to another. And then the last of the Saxons in Germania are converted by 777, when Charlemagne does his famous slaying of the Saxons who refused to convert over, and around in 813, so right at the end of our marker here, basically all of the tribes and peoples on the continent have been converted to Christianity. The holdouts being in eastern Sarmatia, in eastern Germania, western Sarmatia, and of course in Scandinavia. And there we have it. The migration and conversion of the tribes over the course of 600 years. I hope I was able to effectively show the movement and how the movement of one can interface with the other. So anyway, there's my presentation. I hope you all enjoyed it.
Thank you very much. That was cool. So while you were just finishing up there, I was kind of thinking to myself that the Viking Age, which happens essentially right after this, is almost like kind of like the end point to a certain extent of these Germanic migrations,
right?
In a certain way, when I think we can often kind of think of it as a beginning, but it really is kind of like the last stage of that prior to, people moving across the Atlantic.
Oh, I certainly, very much so. I didn't want to get too much into the Viking Age because we want to keep things Roman focused. But yeah, very much so. You have the Norse, the Swedes, the Sphere, the Danes, all moving into England, and then they obviously, they conquer large swathes of England and Ireland, but they journey all into Russia and Hispania and France, and as far as the Middle East. I mean, so absolutely, you're not wrong to view that as an extension of this. But it's also interesting to note that populations tend to settle down once they become converted to Christianity, or maybe it's the other way around. When they settle down, that's when they become more ripe to be converted. When they become more urban and settled and less barbarian-like, I guess.
Any other general questions or comments?
Well, thank you all. I hope you all enjoyed it. Hope I wasn't too tedious moving boxes around on a map.
I really liked this presentation. I learned a lot. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it was really neat to see, like, you know, it starts out as the Roman Empire, then all of a sudden it's the Middle Ages. It's really weird.
Yeah, a lot of that is because the Romans were using the Germans as auxiliary troops, and when those troops were at the end of their service, they brought them in to fight, you know, to colonize their own borders and keep out the other barbarians. So it was kind of like they were bringing in the very elements that were going to eventually take them over.
Okay, so I wanted to just bring up one thing because it was something that Vedius and I had been speaking about. I actually, I don't know if you want to talk about this or not.
Please, by all means.
So a few years ago, Vedius and I were involved in another organization that was involved in the republishing, I guess, of special editions of ancient texts, primarily either in Old Norse or in Latin, into bilingual editions that were, you know, supposed to be available for purchase, and, you know, just to make things more accessible to people on Amazon. And since we had both left that organization, we're like, man, we'd really like to do this again. So for instance, I edited an edition of Germania and also parts of the histories that were related to the Batavian Revolt. This was like one text that I had put together. And I guess we're trying to think about ways in which we could do something like this or along these lines, because it was so relevant, or is so relevant to, you know, what we're doing now.
And the idea is it's a facing page translation, you know, so you have Latin on one side and English on the other, and it relies on public domain works. So, you know, so there's no question of, you know, we have to pay an author who did the translation. And we're talking about things from the 19th century translations or early 20th century that are still valid translations. It's just, you know, they're available. So we don't, you know, there's no question of royalties right now.
Yeah, so, you know, it would be useful, I guess, to have them in front of an audience that actually might, you know, find them useful. So
I think the Latinists might also find it a neat thing to have that kind of facing page translation that might be useful for their you know, for their courses.
Yeah. So I don't know how we would go about doing that now, but, you know, it's something that I'm at least, you know, interested in continuing to pursue. It is a lot of work, as anybody who has ever, you know, been involved in writing something is aware. But, you know, it's something that it's fairly simple to do, just tedious. So
except when you get into a case where the translation that you're working from was going off of a different version of the Latin than you have.
Yeah,
and they don't
which
line
is always
up. that was not fun when that happened every once in a while.
Yeah, but I just thought I'd bring it up because you know, it's something that we were considering kind of starting up again, and I think it's particularly relevant to us. But either way, other than that, I think the primary things to be aware of. So this is our third monthly meeting. We need to have 6 of them total before we can be considered for, you know, official status. We've had a fairly consistent group of individuals coming to these meetings. It's been basically the same people. So I don't foresee there being any problems with, you know, getting formally recognized. The other thing was that, so everybody here, I believe, has signed up for the groups.io group. I sent everybody individual invitations to that, so thank you. So, you know, just like any other group, especially the main list, if you feel like, posting something maybe about what we're doing privately that is, relevant to us, or if you have questions, or if you know other people that are interested in the various barbarian cultures, you can feel free to share that link with them, and they can, join as well. I am thinking that I probably will be posting less on the main list now than I have been so far, because we do have this individual list now. I will probably, the extent to which I will probably be doing this will be, just to send a single reminder for the next meeting, which will probably be about a week prior to it. But the majority of that communication will take place on the list itself. So if you notice that there is, if I'm posting less on the main list, that's why. So I don't want to, because you're going to end up getting the email twice. So I don't want to spam you too much. Other than that, so we can think about what we would like to do next time. So for our fourth meeting, as well as when we would like that to occur. So if we could start with dates, maybe. If we're looking at February, towards the end of the month, probably. So either the
26
19th.
would work very well for me because I don't have a child that weekend.
Okay. I am fine with that. Does the 26th work for most people?
It doesn't for me. I'll be at a gaming convention in Massachusetts that weekend, but if you don't reschedule on my account if it works for everybody else.
Okay.
Well, I don't know of any specific conflicts for me either way. Mahia, is there any other weekend that month that would be equally good for you, to see if we can get Vedius as well?
For me, it's every other week. So the 12th, that would also be without a child, and the 12th of March. But otherwise, it's just going to be a weekend with my child, and then she can sit in front of the TV and enjoy herself if she doesn't want to join us.
Okay. Well, I don't have any personal preference. So if we can get more people on the 12th, then that's great. So what about Julius or Decimus? Do those dates both work for you?
Yeah, as long as it's on a Sunday, then I don't have anything planned.
Okay. All right, so then I suppose the last thing to think about is what we would like to do then. Because it's always nice to have some kind of, planned interaction. Yeah.
Well, I have a suggestion. It's not a presentation by anyone, but perhaps we could actually discuss the Germania by Tacitus. And I think that would be very nice, because there's another group today discussing the Agricola. So perhaps if anyone could talk to them, perhaps they'd be interested in continuing with us reading another of Tacitus's work.
I think that's an awesome idea. So I'm actually going to be at that meeting. I don't know if you are. So what I will do is I'll reach out. So towards the end of the meeting to ask if anybody is interested in doing so, and then I'll let everybody know. So it's also nice for me because I have a hard copy. So I believe, so actually I would also be willing, if anybody here, well, I'm assuming that everybody wants to be there. I can send you a I can send you actually my PDF copy from the translation if you would like it. So it's the facing
Yes,
page
please.
translation.
But
Okay.
please tell me we're not going to read the whole book before a meeting, because I'm studying full time and I have a child and so I can't read
Oh,
the whole
no.
book within a month.
Mm.
That's not going to happen for me.
No, I think so actually it is quite short. But either way, I think that, you know, general discussions are general discussions. And also Germania it's not like it's a straight through kind of thing. It's kind of all over the place. So if there's like particular areas of it that you would be interested in, you can like laser focus on those and then discuss them, I think.
Okay, good.
And are we talking at the same time?
Yeah, I would assume so.
So
Julius.
I don't know if you want to do this, but if you've got this file you want to share, I think as the group's IO owner, you could add it to the file so that it's just there for anyone to access when they want to.
You know, that was a question that I actually had. So I'm really glad that you asked that or said that, because I was having difficulty finding like a file folder on the groups.io website somewhere. So I'm not sure if I'm just missing it or if it's like something that you only get with a paid subscription or something. I don't know if anybody more familiar with it than me knows the answer to that question.
Yeah, I
But
just assumed
don't you normally put the recordings of our lectures and our meetings in a Google Drive? Then you could put the PDF there as well.
Very true. So we do have so I made a like a sticky link in the groups.io group that has the direct link to the Google Drive. However, I have been a part of other groups in the past that have like a folder directly on groups.io, which would be
I
great.
just checked, and you're right. You only get that with the premium account.
Okay. All right. That's fine. So what I will do is I will put a copy of it on the Google Drive, and then I'll let everybody know.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. All right. Anything else before we adjourn for today?
I missed the date for next meeting. Sorry.
Oh, we're going to do the 12th, I think, right? So that Vedius can be here.
Of March, February.
Oh yeah, let's go ahead well, because it's only, so the 12th would only be 1, 2, 3 weeks away.
Yeah.
I think it's fine if we do March, because February is short anyway. I don't know if there's any other ideas about that.
I don't know, just because you're trying to get 6 months of activity in order to qualify. So I'm not sure if that will break our streak if we skip over a month. I don't know one way or another. Perhaps someone else is aware of that.
The only other person I think who would be Vedius, but I'm not sure.
I might what?
Might know if we don't have a physical meeting, if that is going to count against us for 6 months.
I have no idea.
Okay. I'm going to go out on a limb and say it's not going to matter. So we could always do something like virtually instead to say, hey, we actually did something this month. Maybe have some kind of discussion, you know, over the listserv that happens in February, just to like prove it. But I would hope that they're not going to be that strict about it. But point taken. All right, so in that case, let's say March 12th. We will tentatively say noon or 6 p.m. Rome time for those of us in Europe. And I'll make sure that this gets talked about at the meeting that is happening in 2 hours. And I'll see whether or not that time works for them as well. All right, and we'll go from there. All right.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay, thank you all so much, and I look forward to seeing you soon.
Well,
Thank you very
then,
much. Valete.
Valete.
But I think
Valente.